Hey, everyone. Welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day.
I have atrial fibrillation, a cardiac ailment. This indicates that my pulse is erratic. This can weaken the heart over time, increasing the risk of deadly strokes and heart attacks. Following the consultant's recommendation, I was admitted to the hospital for a treatment known as cardioversion. This is a procedure that employs an electric shock to jolt the heart back into normal rhythm. I was to have invasive cardioversion, in which I would be lying on a table and a wire would be pushed through my groin and into a vein until it reached my heart chamber. Then a brief electric shock would be delivered. It sounds risky, and it is. For someone of my medical profile and age, the fatality rate is 15%. The risk factor grows with the patient's age. The consultant told me that I could either have the cardioversion now and have my atrial fibrillation relieved for the next 5 to 10 years, or I could risk dying from a stroke or heart failure without warning. I chose the first option despite the fact that I could die. The hospital was also a teaching hospital, and I was asked if I didn't mind a small group of medical students observing and learning from the procedure as I was being prepared for it. I knew I'd be naked in front of them on a table, but I'd modeled naked for live drawing classes in art schools and for artists in general, so it didn't worry me at all. Anyway, I had a lengthy conversation with the surgeon regarding organ donation and such. I stated that I had seriously considered gifting my body for medical research and organ donation upon my death. Except for the atrial fibrillation, the doctor claimed I was in a good anatomical health, and there was always a shortage of bodies suited for teaching medical students. He thought I had made the proper decision. I completed the relevant paperwork. The big day arrived. I was naked, save for a sheet on the table, ready for the cardioversion. I'd been bathed, and my groin or pubic area had been shaved. To tell the truth, I was afraid. I was terrified since I'd heard that this hospital had one of the highest patient fatality rates in the UK. It appears to be recognized in medical circles as the abattoir. I was profoundly drugged, but not given an anesthesia. I wasn't sure why I wasn't entirely out for the count. Because I wasn't unconscious, I was aware of the wire inside me crawling up through me and into my heart. It felt like it got to my ventricle. Then something happened. My entire body seemed to erupt. There was a burst of white light, and it seemed like a lightning bolt was cutting me to shreds. My mind felt like it was being forced out of my wretched body. I went completely black. After a brief period of forgetfulness, self-awareness returned. I was no longer in my physical body. I thought I'd crossed over into the afterlife. I wondered if this was how death felt. I had previously heard about the concept of the astral body and assumed that this was what I had become. I appeared to be flying high enough above my physical body to observe what was happening. The doctor had removed the covering off my body and unplugged the leads that were attached to my nipples and feet and other areas. My metabolic rate was undetectable, and my pulse rate was nil, as I later discovered. One of the students at the table flipped over my body, separated my buttocks, and inserted a rectal thermometer. I heard the doctor pronounce me dead as if it were usual. At the time of my clinical death, I had urinated a lot. It was revolting, and I felt humiliated. The doctor slapped my bottom and shouted, "Dirty boy," as he instructed the students to clean me up, remove me, and make me presentable for the anatomist, which I felt was very unprofessional. I felt anxious, disoriented, and perplexed. I saw how plump my body appeared stretched out on the table. I also felt the presence of other spirit creatures surrounding me, and their ideas invaded my own consciousness. There were a variety of emotions present, including dread, displeasure, arousal stimulated by my nakedness, and self-pity. I received the impression that these were the ghosts of persons who had died in the hospital that day or recently. As I drifted above my carcass, I seemed to have no control over my trajectory. It felt like I was being wheeled into some sort of room, or I was laid on a slab and delivered into the hands of 2 nurses to be bathed. I was treated as an object, rather than someone who had died. They washed me thoroughly while talking about their night and the night before at a prominent neighborhood dance. They only seemed to notice me as a once animate object when one of them said, "Nice bum," as she turned me over and applied soap to it. Then, very unexpectedly, but no doubt as a matter of procedure, I was thoroughly shaved, most likely to ensure I appeared nice and tidy when I presented myself to the mortician. An ID tag with a barcode was tied to my left ankle after I was cleaned up. I couldn't figure out why I was in a condition of disembodied consciousness when my physical body was obviously dead. It had already turned bluish gray. I could think relatively clearly, but I was concerned about what would happen once my body had been dissected for medical research. Would I be cast aside as a spiritual wisp, a nothingness? I was now an item, not a person, ostensibly dead. I was moved down the corridor into another room. I was placed on a massive set of cadaver-weighing scales here. My torso was placed in a bucket-like structure, with my head and limbs dangling over the side. I was then led to a smaller, darkly lighted room where my body was placed on a glass-topped table. After a little time, 2 students in white coats entered and took a series of photos of me, supine and prone, placed in various poses. I was then transferred to the main morgue and spread out on a massive marble shelf. I was crammed in with other dead bodies, some wrapped in sheets, some nude. I was crammed in next to 2 elderly men, both with gray beards and a beast, one completely bald and the other with a chest covered in tattoos. Ugh. The presence of what I assumed to be the astral bodies of the deceased was palpable in the mortuary. I felt welcomed, as well as other emotions like shock and fury, as well as bitterness at being taken from the real world. I became increasingly aware of something sinister looming above me. This is a spiritual being that is both malevolent and appealing, in my opinion. It seemed to want to absorb and enfold me in an embrace that would end in my oblivion. Something in me wanted to yield to this blackness and lose myself in it forever, as I floated in my non-physical state. However, another voice seemed to caution, "Be careful. Don't." The presence appeared to pull me closer and deeper into its embrace, similar to the pull of gravity. Then I felt a paternal and benevolent presence. My spirit was being drawn away from the power of darkness. I was curious whether that power was the devil. My consciousness faded as I felt completely fatigued and spent. After an intermediate amount of time, consciousness returned. I reasoned that maybe I wasn't dead after all. I was back in my physical body, spread out on a slab, obviously still at the morgue, but I couldn't move or talk because I couldn't move a muscle. My first impression was that I still looked dead, and that I was going to be put in a fridge. The room was well lit and tiled. Alongside me was a little table with a variety of surgical instruments. I was well aware of what was about to happen to me. I was sick of the whole thing by this point, and I prayed that whatever they were about to do to me would be done quickly. I could feel the lines being drawn on my torso with a marker pen to show where I'd be dissected as the mortician droned on about the tissue samples he intended to take. One of the attendants saw a drip of saliva dribbling from my mouth as I was ready to be sliced. The mortician initially refused to recognize that there were signs of life and continued to rip me up. He said that my body was still alive and would provide significant medical data. My nude physique sparked much debate, but thankfully, instruments began to indicate a barely perceptible pulse. I was largely resurrected thanks to cardiac massage and a defibrillator. All of this meant that the cardioversion failed, nearly killing me, and was too dangerous to try again. My severe atrial fibrillation will thus continue, and I will most likely die from it in the not too distant future. In my case, I'm spiritually prepared for this. I'm pleased that my body will be useful in medical research. I'd had a couple of OBEs before, but nothing as intense as the one I've detailed above. What happened to me has caused me to reflect deeply about religion, the earthly spiritual link, and the concept of life after death. I'm eager to learn whatever I can. Speaking with medical personnel while recovering from my NDE/OBE, I discovered that virtually every month at that hospital, bodies given to the mortuary are in fact still medically alive but appear to be dead. Such situations have occasionally gone unreported, resulting in the unfortunate individual being dissected. So I was quite fortunate.